So welcome everybody to this webinar about IFR4NPO. And there's going to be mainly two other people presenting other than me. I'm Tim Boyes-Watson. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy and Alliances here at Humentum. I'm also the Chair of the Practitioners Advisory Group within IFR4NPO. And Samantha Masoke will be kicking us off. She's really the Project Director. And she leads all the stakeholder engagement activity within Humentum. And then Karen Sanderson, who's with SIPFA, who's really the driving force behind all the technical drafting and the consultation paper. So what we're going to do is we'll turn off our videos now, and if everybody else could do the same, and also put yourself on mute, and then that way we should all be able to enjoy the webinar. But please use the chat function whenever you need to ask a question or to comment if something's not working. So over to you, Sam.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tim. So thank you for those of you who've managed to put a few responses in the chat to our opening question, which is what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing. Maybe, Tim, you could take us to slide 4, the next one after that. Yeah, that's right. So some of the challenges that you've mentioned, or maybe Tim, the next slide, slide 4, if you would. That's brilliant, thank you. Some of the challenges that you yourselves have mentioned, you're new to this area, and maybe not, some of you are not so familiar with some of the challenges. So maybe I'll share with you some of the challenges that we've heard from stakeholders in the sector as we've been researching on this for the last few years, last many years. So NPOs, non-profit organizations, as preparers of financial reports, tend to complain about issues that they don't have guidance for how to treat key transactions, things like grants and donations. We often hear people struggling with meeting various donor requirements, and maybe they're different from what their regulators require. So they have to prepare one set of reports for regulators, a different set for donors, and maybe multiple different sets of financial reports for different donors, which puts a burden on preparers in the way that they have to set up their financial systems. And we often hear another complaint from the NPOs themselves is this duplication. They have many audits, many due diligence processes that often are reviewing the same transactions and the same systems. So there's a bit of inefficiency in the process. In terms of the users of financial statements, the people actually who read these general purpose reports, here we're obviously looking at donors as a key user, but also regulators, the public, and what we're calling service recipients, or you could say beneficiaries or clients or community, depending on the NPO. And again, what we're hearing from them is that they're struggling to use those financial statements to assess financial health, or an organization's capacity to absorb more funds, or to really see what their financial results are, or how those financial results correlate with their impact in the area that they're working in. We had somebody in the webinar this morning from Belgium who is also bringing up this point of lack of consistency. So if you're receiving financial reports from lots of different countries, they don't look the same as each other, and it's hard to compare across, even within one country, it's hard to compare one organization with another. So even auditors, who are the specialists in this area of financial reports, they struggle because they're supposed to give an opinion about whether these financial statements give a true and fair view, but they don't have a framework to apply to say whether to define what that true and fair view is. In many countries, there's no applicable guidance. So we get inconsistent treatment, we get arguments between auditors and NPOs on what the right treatment should be. So it's really quite wasteful and time-consuming. I should mention that from what we've been hearing, it is more problematic for countries that lack their own guidance. So there are a handful of countries that do have their own national standards, but many countries in Africa and most of Asia don't. And even where countries do have their own standards, they're different from each other. So we do get this consistency problem. Now, this actually is a very similar state to how things were for the private sector back in the 70s. countries had their own standards and there wasn't international, something to converge towards. And then since, you know, the formation of IFRS and international accounting standards, business reporting has really benefited from having an international set of standards, which we'll look at later. And it's really, frankly, extraordinary that the not-for-profit sector hasn't already got an equivalent. So this is some of the challenges that we're experiencing. So in light of these challenges, what is the IFR4NPO project doing? We've discussed some of the present problems you can see there on the left. We believe that one piece of the jigsaw of providing the solution is to provide internationally applicable guidance. I want to make clear that this is really guidance about the general purpose financial reports, or the annual audited accounts, if you like, which can be different to some of the special purpose reports that a donor might ask for. They might want a report that's about a specific project or for a specific time period. What we're talking about here really is the annual audited general purpose accounts. So you can see here that we believe that once this guidance is developed and adopted and widely used, there's so many benefits that can accrue. We can have more efficient due diligence because users can make more sense of the financial statements, stronger audit assurance because auditors have a framework to refer to, and the other benefits you can see there. And ultimately, a more resilient and accountable sector, which is what we really, really all want. I should mention here also that with respect to donor reporting formats, which as I said is slightly different, there is another complementary sector project that Humentum is working on, looking to harmonise those donor reports. But that project is kind of looking to the IFR4NPO project as well to give some guidance and some technically credible solutions to some of the accounting challenges. So we're working hand in hand. So we've looked at some of the challenges, some of the problems, and we've looked at the what of what we think the solution is. So now let's go over to the this evidence of demand. Here we are, that's it. So we've looked at this sort of theoretical solution. We can see that in theory, providing this guidance would be helpful, but it's also rooted in evidence. There's a survey back in 2014, 179 countries we had responses from, and you can see from the pie chart there that it's really quite a good geographical spread. And out of those respondents, 72% agreed or strongly agreed that international standard would be useful. Obviously, this was stronger in the countries that don't already have their own guidance, but still an overwhelming yes to the question, should we get into, would international guidance be useful? So if we can go to the next slide, please, Tim, thank you. I'm not surprised that there was this demand that we saw in that questionnaire, that survey. I myself, I've lived in Uganda for 19 years. I've seen firsthand the waste and the frustration, smaller NPOs in the developing countries most adversely affected. Now, standardization of financial reporting might not sound very exciting, but I am excited about standardization because it has the power to catalyze massive change over time. So we can see here on the slide some of the impact in the private sector. If we think of the international accounting standards, they started being issued in sort of, I think, 1973 with the formation of the International Accounting Standards Council, and then the IFRS Foundation was formed in 2001. And now that a significant number of countries, we can see 113 so far, have adopted IFRS or they're aligned to it, there are tremendous benefits that are being seen for the capital markets that rely on that information. There's a study here that was done in 2017, and the benefits that you can see from the capital markets is that, you know, more people read and use the financial reports because they're more meaningful, and that results into more money flowing into those capital markets, including international flows, more access to finance. And wouldn't that be great for our sector? More people reading the financial statements, making sense of them, having more trust in what they say, and therefore more funds flowing in. We can see an equivalent in the public sector. It's more recent. So the International Public Sector Accounting Standards started to be issued in 1997. So far, they've been adopted by, or they're used by, so I say 19 countries, but 72 more are in progress, shall I say, to adopt it by 2023. So there's a real move towards international standardization. And a recent report just a few weeks ago from ACCA shows that countries preparing their reports on this basis are really reaping the benefits of fiscal credibility, decision useful information. So there are huge benefits to be gained, and we hope that we'll look back in years to come. There'll be a third column in this diagram for the not-for-profit sector, and we'll be able to see some similar long-term, massive scale benefits. So that's why I'm excited about financial reporting standards. So we've looked at the why and a bit about the what. So let's have a look at the who. Who is behind this project? So in brief, there's two partners, but bringing in very many different stakeholders from across the sector. So Humentum is a membership association. We're sort of global. We have registered in the UK and the US, but have staff all over the world. We are convening the practitioner advisory group, which Tim mentioned earlier. And that's comprising non-profit organizations, donors, auditors, academics, a real section of users and preparers of financial statements. As Humentum, we're quite close to non-profit organizations and donors in the sector. So we have good relationships across the sector with those types of stakeholders. And crucially, we've partnered with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which is the only professional accountancy organization in the world that's specifically dedicated to public and not-for-profit finance. They're based in the UK, and they're convening the technical advisory group, bringing together 13 or so national and international standard setters, specialists in accounting, specialists in not-for-profit accounting. And in terms of sector stakeholders, SIPFA is very close to standard setters internationally and also to the accounting and audit community. And what we can see here is the importance of bringing the whole sector together to produce something that will help the sector as a whole. I should mention that the other international accounting standards that we looked at on the earlier slide, they're issued by very well-known accounting bodies, the International Accounting Standards Board and the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. Now, those boards are aware of this project, most certainly, and it has their blessing, shall we say, in terms of going ahead and what we're trying to achieve. And indeed, there's an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board who sits on the technical advisory group. So they're very closely following what we're doing and excited and making sure we're taking a good technical direction, which is really happy to have them on board. It's so important. So if I just, to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Tim. We mentioned these advisory groups. The technical advisory group, that picture there is from our first meeting in October in London. There's a couple more actually of our African members who didn't make it to the photo. And on the right, we have there our practitioner advisory group. That was our first meeting in December in Nairobi. And both of those groups have actually since grown. The technical advisory group, these are the standard setters, making sure there's appropriate technical rigor, really professional, watertight guidance to be written. And the practitioner advisory group, thinking about the relevance, the user friendliness, the practical application of how things will be worked out. So these two advisory groups, we're hugely grateful to them, and it's wonderful to have such a diverse, globally representative set of groups to be advising the project. So that's a bit about the who. Could you move to the next slide, please, Tim? Thank you so much. So we've mentioned that engaging stakeholders from different parts of the world is really key. So we launched just last year, but so far we've managed to engage, people have registered their interest in the project from more than 80 countries. I think we're at 81 as of today, which is really exciting and more growing. And we've also had 12 country champions who are giving a really local perspective at their own national jurisdiction level of what the implications for IFR4NPO might be. So this is really, really important for us, because we could have a couple of people sitting in a room writing a standard and it might be excellent, but unless we have this engagement and input from people all over the world, it really won't meet the needs that are in so many different countries. So that's a really important aspect to this project, is this engagement of stakeholders all over the world. Brilliant. Can I have the next slide, please, Tim? Thank you. So that's a bit about the who. If we look at the how, this roadmap to long-term change, there's really three phases to the development process, which is really equivalent to exactly the same way that IFRSs or IPSASs are developed. And the first phase is this consultation phase. We're currently in the process of developing a consultation paper, which will be issued in January 2021. And what that does is it sets out what we and a TAG and the PAG believe to be the key issues, some of the challenges, and some alternatives for solutions. It doesn't present a solution. It says that here are some options, and then it's asking for input and feedback from stakeholders all around the world. What do you think? What do you prefer, and why? Have we got the right issues here? Have we presented the advantages and disadvantages in a way that resonates with your reality? So that's a really important phase, because that gives us evidence and data for phase 2, which is really developing an exposure draft. In phase 1, it's all about options and alternatives. By phase 2, we're coming to a real proposal for an actual standard. And the idea is to get that ready by April 2023. That will also go for public comments and feedback and be fed into the final guidance, which will be launched in 2024, ready to be adopted by different jurisdictions and or donors. As you can see here, the final guidance, which is the end of this project, is really the beginning. It's not the end, it's the beginning, because it's the benefits that we described earlier really come when the guidance is widely adopted and used. And that's why, as I mentioned, we've got these two sort of cornerstones in the project design: the technical drafting and rigor on the one side, and the stakeholder engagement on the other. Reaching out to regulators, national professional accountancy organizations, donors and NPOs during the development process, so that by the time it's finished, they're ready and willing to adopt it or align to it or use it in one way or another. So we're really, really excited about this process. Now, as I mentioned, it starts with the consultation paper. So I'm now going to hand over to Karen Sanderson, who will tell us a bit more about that stage.
Thank you very much, Sam. So I'm going to concentrate in my section on the consultation paper itself and give you a bit of an inside look at what might be in it and how we've been thinking about issues. And the consultation paper is, as Sam said, really, really important for us. When we get to the next stage, we'll be doing a draft of the guidance. So it's really important that we look at questions now that might inform how we draft that guidance. So it's really crucial that we get some really good responses to the consultation paper and that we're managing to engage with as many people as possible as part of that process. So the consultation paper itself is going to come in a number of different parts. And I thought I'd just kind of walk you through that so that you get some idea what to expect. The preface to the document will tell you about what are the objectives of the project. So some of the problems that Sam has talked to in her section, we'll turn those into objectives so everyone can see what we're trying to achieve by this. The preface will also set out how to respond to the consultation paper, if you like, the mechanical parts of it, but it'll also help people navigate the document as well, because as you can see, there's going to be a number of parts to it. The meat of the paper, though, is going to be in part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is really about the framework issues, the things that are about the whole of the NPO sector, and the kind of cross-cutting things. What are the things that you need to know about the sector to be able to produce financial reports for it? So it's thinking about it from a sort of a higher level perspective. And what we'll be doing in there is we'll be asking questions through what we call general matters for comment, as they relate to this. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. Part 2 of the paper is drilling much more into the detail and is going to be looking at specific accounting issues. So we'll be getting into, if you like, some of the more transactional stuff, and we'll be looking at the sector-specific issues that people have told us is a problem for them. So we'll be looking at how do we identify those issues, and we'll also be discussing a number of those issues in the paper. And with that, we'll then have a number of what we call specific matters for comment, where again, we'll be asking some questions about what people's experiences are and what issues they think they have. The glossary, we'll have a glossary in the document that will set out what we mean by particular terms in the document. We're really conscious that different terms mean different things in different jurisdictions, and we're keen to try and ensure that there is a common understanding about what we mean when we're talking about things in the consultation paper. So you may find a slightly different explanation of a term to what you're used to. So it's important that that's referred to make sure, as I said, that there is this consistent explanation. We'll also have some supplementary information for those that want to go into a bit more background about the project. That will be there and available. And then we'll also have an executive summary that tries to give a bit of an at a glance about what's in the document. I think one of the things that I wanted to say that's really important about this is that when the guidance is issued, in common with all international accounting standards, it will be non-mandatory. That means each jurisdiction can decide whether to adopt the guidance, and when they want to adopt it, how they want to adopt it will be very much a local decision. But it's important to us that when we're developing the guidance, that it has got that international applicability. And that's something that is important to reflect on as we're pulling together the consultation paper and people are responding to it. So just to recap, in the consultation paper, the questions will be in parts 1 and 2, and the instructions for responding will be in the preface. I'd love to say I would love everybody to respond to every question in the consultation paper, but that isn't a requirement. You can choose the bits that you want to respond to, the bits that are relevant to you. So don't feel that if you are responding, you have to look at everything. Could I have the next slide, please? So I said I would come back to part 1 and what we call the framing or the landscape level issues. This is trying to deal with everything that is relevant to general purpose financial reports or in the not-for-profit sector, and how do you decide how to frame them. So what we'll be looking at as part of this is, well, what do we mean by an NPO in the first place? How do you know if you are one? There's such a huge range and diversity of entities out there. How do you know whether this guidance is intended for you? So that's one of the issues that we'll be exploring. We'll also be exploring around, well, is it every NPO that the guidance applies to, or is it specific types of NPO? We're conscious, for example, that there are very many small NPOs that are community-based that do their accounts on a cash basis. And so it clearly is a question about whether we're intending the guidance for those groups of people. We're looking at who uses general purpose financial reports and what do they want to use them for. So we go to the role of accountability and decision making as part of that. And also what features need to exist in financial reporting that mean that they'll be suitable for international guidance. And I'll keep stressing the word international because that's just such an important part of thinking about all of this. And as a final part of this, we'll also be looking at the suitability of existing international frameworks. So Sam has talked about IFRS and IPSAS that are out there. And so there has to be a question for us about would any of those work for NPOs, part of it work, and what's the best way of dealing with that? So that's part of the exam question that we're looking at too. Could we just move on to the next slide, please? So this is your opportunity to share your thoughts with us. And I'm interested in your views about what you think is needed for the guidance to work internationally. So we're giving you a list of terms there. You can tick all of them if you think all of them apply. But I'll just give you a little bit of time now. If you could just look at the question that's in front of you and tick the relevant boxes and submit that. We'll have a look and see what you as a community all think about this. Just give you a couple of more seconds just to go through that. Hopefully it won't take you too long. Tim, do we have the poll ready yet?
Yeah, we'll just give it one more second, I think, Karen.
Okay, thank you. So if there are things that you have in the other box, please do put them in the chat, but we would like to see whether you think these things are relevant. Okay.
I'm sharing the results now.
Okay, fantastic. Right. Wow. 100%. I think it's the first time I've seen 100% on how would the guidance relate to international standards. And clearly that's something that I share with you in my thinking, as I've just said. So it's good to know that you're putting a high priority against that. And stakeholders' needs. Again, I think as Sam said when she spoke, the cross-section with donor reporting comes up as an issue we've seen. So it's good to see that you two see that as an issue. And not too worried yet about how the guidance will be developed. And that's also good to hear, because I think what we want to do is to hear from the community and get some evidence about what's needed before we think about that next step ourselves. So thank you very much for your responses to that. That's really interesting, and we'll be, as we take these polls, we'll be bringing them all together to see how the whole landscape plays out. Tim, could you move us on to the next slide, please? So I wanted to just talk a bit more about when we talk about NPOs, which one? If you could bring up the first block. I think I said that we know that NPOs are pretty diverse in what they are by way of nature, size, legal status. And you've only got to look at the nature of NPOs to see the diversity that's in there, from humanitarian aid to churches, schools, healthcare, as well as membership organisation, advocacy. The range of entities is huge. And with that goes size as well, because some of these are very much in the community, just supporting local needs, whereas others work on an international basis with multiple sources of funding from multiple jurisdictions. And then on top of that, there is kind of what is their legal status. So in some jurisdictions, there's legislation around this, in some less so. But in some jurisdictions, you can be incorporated as a company. You could be registered as a charity. You could be on the fringes of the public sector and as a not-for-government organisation, or you could be a trust. So we need to have guidance that is suitable for all of those types of entities. So how do we do that? If you could bring up the next block. I mean, this is something that has been occupying our thinking, and where we're at the moment is that we think it's incredibly challenging to have a single definition that is going to cover all NPOs. So the way that we're thinking about it at the moment is around a characteristics type approach. And we're looking at the types of things that an NPO might do, or the way in which it behaves that single it out. And we're currently thinking about 3 ways of characterizing an NPO. One is about its primary objectives, where we're thinking that if the objectives are more around social purposes, then they might be an NPO, rather than perhaps a private sector organisation where they're looking at financial returns. We're also looking about where do they derive their revenue from. And here we are saying that if most of the revenue comes from what we call voluntary sources, and we use the word non-exchange, and if you follow the project, you'll see that word come up time and time again. And by that, we mean that somebody gives some money and doesn't expect anything for their own benefit in return for that. So not like if you go to the shops and you buy some tea bags or something, where you pay some money and you get the tea bags in return. That's an exchange transaction because you get something of equal value in return. Here we're talking about where you don't get something of equal value in return. And that's something that we see a lot in the NPOs that we've looked at so far. And finally, that if there are surpluses generated, they are used to further the primary objectives. They're not used to return monies to investors or funders. So we're saying that if you have got these kinds of characteristics, you could be an NPO. And it may be that 2 of them are relevant and 1 less so because of the range of entities. We're not at this point in time thinking about being prescriptive about it, but we want to put these principles in place to think about it. And in terms of applicability, we're also thinking about the size of organisation. And our expectation at the moment is that we're not looking to convert everybody who is on cash, the very small entities, onto accruals-based accounts, but we are trying to benefit those organisations where we see the most problems. And that's probably likely to be those in the small and medium size band. But again, we're not going to be prescriptive. We're not suggesting there should be a dollar threshold or a pound or a euro threshold or whatever currency might be relevant, but just looking at the types of things that the entity does to characterize who it might be applied to. And one thing I should say across the whole piece here is that we're still thinking about this. It's currently June and we're not due to issue the consultation paper till January. So there's plenty of time for us to be thinking about this over the coming months. But this represents sort of our current thinking at the moment. If I could have the next slide, please. So that's part 1 and some of the things about what will be in part 1 of the consultation paper. Part 2 of the consultation paper is going to be dealing much more with the specific issues, and we'll be seeking feedback on these as individual topics as part of the paper. And we've been thinking about how to construct this, and through the work that's been done in the past and the feedback that we've got, we've constructed a long list of issues that people have said are relevant for the not-for-profit sector. And here I mean specific for the not-for-profit sector, not more generally. And the list is quite long, and we have to kind of recognise what we can do in the first stage of this guidance, the first phase of this guidance. So we've also developed some criteria to prioritise which are the topics we should invest most of our time in, the ones that we think are going to have the most benefit for the sector. So we have 4 criteria, which are prevalence, in that they're common across the sector globally, consequence, that they have an important impact on accountability and decision making and the financial statements, demand, That is that preparers and stakeholders really want this, and there's widespread support for it. And the final one is feasibility, and that is that it's possible to develop a technically sound solution in a reasonable time frame, and the resource constraints that we have, so that we can actually get there. What you see in front of you on the slide are some examples of the kinds of things that have come to the fore so far. So typically they are things that are about revenue, how to record revenue that's come in, how to record expenditure. We've got presentational issues, including narrative reporting. We've got things about how to record non-financial assets. And we've also had topics around a reporting entity. What is a reporting entity? And that includes when someone is acting as an agent for somebody else. So there's kind of a huge range of topics that are there. And like part one, we're interested to get some of your feedback on this. So we're going to put another poll out to you. And I've just picked 4 of those kind of topic areas, and we're interested in knowing whether they are relevant to you or not. I'll launch the poll in a minute, or should I say Tim will launch the poll in a second. But just before I do that, I just thought I'd talk you through some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of these areas. So for narrative reporting, we're thinking about, should there be a specific framework for NPOs? Is consistency of NPO narrative reporting important for stakeholders? If so, what should be included? Should ratios be a requirement? And if so, do we need to define what goes into those ratios? So there's a number of questions on narrative reporting. On donations in kind, there's questions about if you get some things given to you that you distribute immediately on or very shortly to somebody else, do you have to recognize that? If you get low value, high volume things that you're intending to resell, do you recognize those? And if so, when and how do you measure them? Questions about disclosures that are there. So again, a number of questions about donations in kind, and some of those might resonate with you. On expenses classification, I think one of the key questions is how to best represent expenditure. We see there's questions about, do you use a nature of spend or a function of spend type analysis? Could you do those? Should we be setting out what the analysis should be? Should we be trying to seek consistency? And if so, should there be any headings that we should be looking at? So some things to think about there. And then finally, on cash transfers, some of the questions again we're looking at is, if money is paid by way of donation or grant that can only be used for a specific purpose or time period, when should you recognize that? And when should you report it? What happens if there are performance criteria? What does that mean for reporting? And a third thing is, what happens if you get reimbursed based on work done and an audit being done? When can you recognize the revenue if the audit hasn't yet happened? So there's a myriad of questions here. I've given you some of the things that we're thinking about, and there may be other questions as well. But now we'll go into the poll and get your thoughts about which ones are important to you. Can I ask that there are 4 questions here, so if you can scroll down the bar and let us make sure that you fill in all 4. You can just give us your gut reaction to those and submit your response. It would be fantastic. Once you've done all 4, you should be able to hit the submit button. So we'll just give you a little bit more time. If you could complete that. Tim, are we nearly ready?
Just about another 25 seconds.
Okay, great. To say the feedback that you're providing us is really helpful as part of this. So we're grateful to get your responses.
Right, I'm going to end it now and share the results then.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so let's have a look. Interesting split on narrative reporting, with a third of people saying there are no issues and a third saying it's problematic. There must be another layer we need to get to underneath that to find out why that is the case. So maybe different types of NPOs have got different issues. Donations in kind, minor issues and some problematic issues. So I think and 11% saying very problematic. So that would suggest that there probably are generally more issues in that area. On expense classification, again, most people saying that there is an issue of some description, although perhaps majority of those are minor. And on the cash transfers, wow, well, most people saying that that is problematic or very problematic. And I can let you know that that was also reflected in the poll that we did at a similar session this morning. So clearly an area that is occupying many of you. And I would encourage you that if you've got further thoughts on this, to participate in the online forum that's available on the website. We'd love to know more about where you're saying that things are problematic or very problematic, to hear a bit more about that so that we can consider that as we're developing the paper further. Tim, can I move you on to the next slide? So I just wanted to talk you through a little bit about what you might expect to see in some of the topic papers in part 2. So we've just picked cash transfers as an example here. So what you should see is a description of the issue. It will hopefully be something that resonates with you, where you can see the kinds of things that we're talking about and the kinds of issues that you are confronting. So in the case of cash transfers, we'll be talking about, you know, donations, and those could be donations for operating activity or capital, and things that might have stipulations. Have the next box, please. Alongside that, we'll then be talking about the financial reporting challenges. So if you've got these issues, what's the problem then in terms of trying to pull together your financial statements? And that will go to the kind of what revenue do you recognize when, and how do you present and disclose that? The next box, please. Also in the paper, we'll give you sort of a bit of a snapshot about what's there in existing guidance. So what's in IFRS, what's in IPSAS, and what's in IFRS for SMEs. We'll also share where we have some information about what's going on in specific jurisdictions. A number of jurisdictions have guidance that's based on IFRS, IPSAS, and IFRS for SMEs, and some have developed their own. And we'll share with you what they've done relating to this topic for some background context. And we'll also show you some alternatives. If I can bring up the final box, Tim. So what we're not doing in the consultation paper is giving you specific accounting treatments. What we are going to put in the document is ways in which we could approach a particular issue. I'm looking at that in the context of existing international and national guidance. So there won't be any worked examples in the paper, but we will be putting in disadvantages and advantages, so you've got some idea about what the implications might be of each alternative. And finally, we will be putting in the specific matters for comment. So these will be questions about the issues, the alternatives, the advantages and disadvantages we're talking about, so that we can get your feedback about whether we're approaching this in the right way, and if so, which ones you might favour. So I think there's a number of things that we would like to see. You can expect to see in there on which we would get your feedback. Have the next slide, please. So I've taken a bit of a whistle-stop tour there. If you go onto the IFR4NPO website, you can see a bit more information about some of the accounting issues that we've been thinking about as part of the project. These may or may not be the topics that get into the final guidance, but these are the ones that we believe, based on the feedback we've had so far, are the ones that are the ones that can deliver the most benefit. But we would encourage you to go in and have a look and see what's there. And if you feel strongly enough about it, which hopefully you will, that you go and contribute to the forum online, particularly in terms of the issues that you're facing, so that we can make sure that we're reflecting on those as part of putting together the consultation paper. Thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll hand back to Sam, I think.
Super. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for taking us through that. Now, we have got time for questions and comments, but before we do that, I'd love to hear from you, the question on the screen. One thing that you hope that the IFR4NPO guidance could change. If it was just one thing that could be changed by this guidance, what would it be? If you could share that in the chat, that would be really helpful for us. What's your pain point that you hope this guidance could change? Just give you a few seconds to type something. I'm feeling shy. Standardized donor reporting. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think this is where many organizations, their most influential, the most powerful user is the donor, because that's where the source of the money, which reflects actually the same equivalent in private sector. It's the investors are the sort of most powerful user because they're the source of money. I should really mention here that we have, I mentioned it earlier, but just to reiterate, there's a sister project, or not sister, complementary sector project called Money Where It Counts, which is looking at harmonizing donor reporting. And as you say, if that can build on this project, that would be a fantastic win. George is saying standardized auditing practices, so that when you're experiencing an audit, it doesn't, you get the same sort of experience from different auditors. At the moment, my experience in Uganda is that one auditor will let you treat a capital grant, say, in one way, and another auditor will require something else. So it would definitely make things easier. Laurie, again, you could design internal policies and procedures around, so it enables organizations to be able to standardize their own internal systems to align with something that's internationally accepted. So I think there's a number of fantastic blue sky thinking, some great big changes that we hope this guidance can catalyze. Thank you for sharing those. Do you want to do that? Would you move us on to the next slide, please, Tim, which is really about how you can engage. There's a number of ways. So Karen has already mentioned about the online forum. I'm going to put the links here in the chat. Yes. So you can see the bottom link there that says login is logging into the online forum, which is really a conversation space. There are threads of conversations around particular accounting issues, and then there's a general space to share more general questions or comments or opinions. There'll be people who are involved in non-profit financial reporting from all over the world. It's quite a niche area, and we hope this will be a place where many different people interested in this area can come together and share opinions and meet each other as well. So please do log into that forum and join a conversation there. Visit the website. We launched the website less than a month ago. It's very new, but there's a lot of resources and information there about the project. There's also a newsletter you can subscribe to. It's about every couple of months. It's not an inbox filler, but it will keep you up to date with how the project is progressing. It's a long project, so it's good to sort of keep a slow burn on the progress so that you know how it's going to affect you. You can share your logo. So one of the things that we need to do is to demonstrate that the sector is behind this as a project. We've got obviously the survey from 2014, but it helps us in fundraising to show that different people are behind it as an idea. So if you're able to share your organization's logo, that really helps us. And really importantly, as Karen said, we need your responses to the consultation paper. So I want to make it clear that comments in the online forum are more of a conversation. They won't be formally analysed in the same way that the responses to the consultation paper are. So that's a really important place to log your opinions formally. There's one more, as we maybe can move to the last slide of questions and comments. If you would share any questions or comments in the chat, or feel free to raise a hand or unmute yourself and ask. There was one question earlier from George, which is a really important question I wanted to make sure we have an answer to. George asked, when I shared the slide about the different countries that were involved and the country champions, he noticed that there wasn't one in America, which seems to be a big omission. Why aren't they engaged? So it's really important. Thank you, George, for commenting on that. So we have 12 country champions so far, but we're looking to have, we've identified 21 focus countries, of which USA is one, and we are looking to identify a country champion for the USA. I should mention that the Federal Accounting Standards Bureau, FASB, are a member of the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, and we have somebody from USAID sitting on the PAG, and we have very many stakeholders engaged in the USA. So it's not that they're not involved by any means, we just haven't appointed a country champion yet. If you know of anyone who'd like to be a country champion, please let me know. So are there any other questions or comments that you have before we finish our session together? As I say, you can put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask, either way.
So I have a question. Can everybody hear me? So
yes, we can hear you.
I think that this is what you guys are doing are great, and it's really needed right now in this space. But I also think it would be kind of beneficial, like during this time, because the timeline is so long. If you guys find like resources or materials, will you put them up on your website for other NPOs to familiarize themselves with or use?
Absolutely. So actually on the website, there's a section called resources. There's a treasure trove of different things in there. So one section in the resources is all the existing national standards for nonprofits. So you can see, you know, what does Japan have, and UK and US. So if you want to dive in there, this is sort of what we've been using as our reference materials. Okay. There's that section for each accounting issue, which links you to the TAG papers and PAG papers that we've been discussing so far. I should mention, as Karen said, that those are kind of work in progress, building up towards the consultation paper, but it gives you a sense of the current direction of travel. There's also various other articles and academic papers in that resources section on the website. As you say, it's a long road, and I wish we could say we'll have a solution. There'll be guidance in a year, but if we did, it wouldn't have all that international consensus. So unfortunately, some patience is required, even though the need is last year, or last decade. But thank you for mentioning that, Erin. That's a really good question. Sarah's also asked, will the guidance include any information on the level of programmatic detail that should be formally tracked in the accounting system, such as for donor reports like the PEPFAR expenditure report? So some donor reports, obviously, they want a lot of detail on what's happening programmatically, because obviously donors are very interested in that. I think that feeds back into the topic that Karen was mentioning that we did a poll on, which is the narrative reporting. So in that question that goes out in the consultation paper, it will be, on the first level, should we have some standardized narrative reporting at all? Is it worthwhile? And then if we do, what sorts of issues should be in that narrative report? What level of programmatic detail would be appropriate? So that it can support users and understand and have some context for the financial numbers, because especially for a non-profit, the numbers are in many ways secondary to the actual impact that the project is happening. So I think the answer to your question there lies in the narrative reporting section of the consultation paper. The results that come back from that will inform how that progresses. I don't know, Karen, if you want to add anything to that.
Just unmute myself. No, I think that's right. I don't think I've got anything to add to that. You know, it's
brilliant.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go in this project and lots of things to uncover, and working out exactly how we tie all these things together is going to be part of that too.
Brilliant. And as Karen's just mentioned there in the chat, on the website, in that resources section, there's a button at the bottom, which is that please submit something that you've got to share. So if you have any resources that are relevant for this, especially, you know, for specific jurisdictions, you please just do submit them there, and we can add them to that resource section. So it becomes a sort of center of excellence, if you like, a hub for the go-to place for information about international financial reporting issues for nonprofits. Wonderful. So if there are no more questions, let me just hand back to Tim to close us out. Thank you, Tim.
Great. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's really important to have these meetings, and we'll be coming back to you over time, over the whole 5 years, and we'll also be trying to organize country level awareness meetings, regional roundtables. So do sign up so that you can stay informed about what we're doing. This is a long-term project trying to really make radical transformation to a long-term problem, and it's great to have you part of the journey. Thanks for coming.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice Monday.
Bye.
You too. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.